All right, we will call this July 3rd Newberry Planning and Zoning Board meeting to order. We'll begin with approval of the agenda. Then we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance, approval of the June 5th, 2017 minutes. We have one item under new business. It's an application by DSM Holdings, owners for a variance petition to allow placement of a freestanding sign that exceeds current allowable sign dimensions as defined in the City of Newberry Land Development Regulations in a commercial general zoning district at 25050 West Newberry Road. Announced date application will first be heard by the City Commission, and we'll have topics for members for discussion, and then we will adjourn. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda as read?
I make a motion to approve.
Motion by Mr. Boyer. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Hersom. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. All right. Can we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Could I have a motion for the approval of the June 5 minutes? Are open for discussion if there is any.
So moved.
I have a motion by Mr. Boyer
Second.
and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And it passes unanimously. All right, Mr. Thomas, you want to lead us through our new business?
Mr. Mayor, a small apology. This is actually a quasi-judicial item, and so we did not list it as such. So we need to read the quasi-judicial procedure.
All right, I'm getting very good at this quasi-judicial. Okay, this procedure is to ensure that the applicant provides a complete presentation of their request prior to any testimony being provided by staff. All public testimony will be taken under oath. Everyone testifying will be subject to cross-examination. All documents and exhibits shall be entered into evidence. The giving opinion testimony is limited to experts, and closing arguments will be limited to the evidence of record. The procedure we will follow this evening is that we will first hear from the applicant with no time limit. The applicant will then be subject to cross-examination. The staff will then enter the staff report in the record and answer questions. The applicant will then have the opportunity for rebuttal of any testimony against the application. The floor will then be open for public comment, with each presentation being limited to 5 minutes. Members of the public will have an opportunity to question the applicant or staff. Then the applicant will have an opportunity for closing arguments, and then the public hearing will be closed, and the board will enter into deliberations. If there's anyone here tonight who intends to testify, could you please stand so that our attorney can administer the oath? If you think at all you want to talk tonight, please go ahead and stand now and save time.
Do you swear affirm to tell the truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, Mr. Attorney, do we need to do the ask for
Any ex parte
Thank you. I always
communications?
forget that word.
Yes, this would be the time to ask for that. Ex parte communications, or any communications you've had outside of these chambers this evening, which would be in reference to the applications that's before you tonight. So if you've talked to the applicant, talked to citizenry, or talked to anybody about this matter, then you should put that on the record now. That's the purpose of it.
would anybody like to enter in any ex parte? No? No?
No.
Hearing none. Okay. All right. We'll hear from the applicant then first.
If you would.
Bill Ryan with Ryan Markland Signs, representing Dr. St. Martin and Quick Care Med.
All right.
What we'd like to do is put a pole sign up that exceeds your square footage and height requirement in a location that can be seen and has good visibility for the building. One of our problems is I don't know if you've noticed the wall sign that we did put up. It's blocked by that little red wall that sticks out.
It is, yes.
And we're trying to overcome that and have good visibility so that this business can be successful.
Okay. Is it any on the board? Is that the conclusion of your presentation, sir?
I guess.
All right. Does anyone on the board have any questions for the applicant?
Is the signage that's on the building, is that lit?
Yes.
Okay.
I assume from the excuse me, the detail, will this sign be lit also?
Yes.
So how will the
the electrical service be run to that sign
Underground.
underground?
Is it important in your mind for the sign to be that high, or could it be, because it seems to me if you go up, you almost get lost in the trees. If it was down on the ground right as people's eyesight, that would be better.
Yeah, the problem is cars and trucks parking and blocking. So we
okay.
want to be above, let's say, a van parked next to it.
Okay. And so you're aware of staff's proposal to where to move so you don't lose the parking places?
Yeah, we wouldn't lose a parking place where we proposed it. We would split a parking space,
Mm-hmm.
so a car could park on either side. If we put it in the grass area, we'd have the same problem that we have with the wall sign. It would be blocked by the building.
Okay, so your proposed location is at the southwest corner.
No, I think it's right
Is that- I'm trying to see that little dark arrow. Oh, you got a better map than I've got. So is it the black arrow there, or is it the red line?
It's.
Where's the? Do you have a?
It's the black arrow, Mr. Mayor. Well, I'll have a picture
The arrow
that shows
You'll
you
have
to
a
better.
the location.
Okay. All right. So I guess we can wait till get into that after staff's presentation then, or does the board want to ask any questions of the applicant about the location?
One of the desire to exceed the allowable dimensions. I guess what's the thought process behind that? Is that a standard sign size?
It is. It's actually, it will be one of the smaller signs for his franchise, or not his franchise, but for his company. It's not a big sign.
This is the kind of sign that has a digital writing that's lit up that
The
you can change.
small bottom
Right.
cabinet is.
What would you foresee going across there? Big flashing lights?
No, he
No?
doesn't like it to flash. He likes it to come on, stay on, so you can read it, and then go
And
off.
then go
a new
off.
one come up. And he's, in other locations, I programmed them where they flashed and scrolled,
Mm-hmm.
and he said, no, he doesn't like that. So he just has them come on, sick now, seen now, goes off, no insurance, no problem, goes off,
Okay.
things like that.
All right.
So I guess that made me question. So at least in our schematic, is it the digital sign or is it the entire sign? Is the size in question? And maybe that be more appropriate for when Brian.
It's the entire sign. It's digital plus the non-digital.
Any other questions from this board to the applicant? Mr. Boyer?
I've got, is the V17-03 sight lines, it's showing where the staff is recommending it on the turf, correct? Whereas he's looking to put it in front of the building. Am I understanding that correctly?
I'm still not 100% clear on, on where the lines are. I've got a black arrow underneath a red line that shows it right at that south
'Cause I'm looking
corner.
at this one here, this drawing here, or aerial, and over in the corner, it's showing it has good visibility from two directions on that intersection versus being by the sidewalk near the road.
I think staff has a better picture that they can show us when we get to staff's presentation for the visibility, because that's going to be the bulk of my questions are going to be about that as well, I guess. Has the applicant already purchased the sign, or is he waiting for the
The
decision?
sign's built.
The sign's built,
Yeah, the sign was built when we first came to the city.
and then you found out it was out of ordinance.
I check, before I ever sell a sign, I
Yeah.
always check with code in the city and make sure that when I'm proposing, before I even propose it to my client, that it's gonna be permittable. And I was assured that this wouldn't be a problem.
Ah,
After many months and time, then it became apparent that it was a problem.
okay. Well, we'll ask staff about that when it comes staff time as
It
well.
was a misunderstanding. I guess.
Ah, okay. All right. Any other questions from the board?
The design of it, was there any consideration to have it more centered to what the other signs in that area represent. Like you've got across the street, it's a lower sign for the Newberry Church of Christ. You've got Ulrich's old building. You
The
know,
produce
it-
place has a sign down on the ground.
Yeah, it probably sits 10 foot up, but it's more in key with, you know, the other signs in the area versus, you know, what they're looking to put up. I just want to know if that was ever a consideration, you know, looking around the area and seeing what other kinds of signage we have.
Well, normally what we do is we look at the sign code and the district that we're in and any requirements. This is a sign that complies with he's got 9 locations now, I believe, that are open.
Mhm.
He is taking this nationwide as a franchise. These are all corporate owned, but his intention is to go nationwide. And he wants to keep that continuity throughout his corporation. As far as the height, again, we need it just to be above the cars and vans and so forth, so we don't lose the visibility.
Any other comments or questions for the applicant? Okay, hearing none. All right, sir, let staff enter in their report. And then we'll ask staff some questions.
Okay, Mr. Mayor. Hopefully this will clear up some of the issues. Didn't mean for that to go out in black and white. It's a little difficult to read. And so, as stated, the request, currently our LDRs would limit the sign height to 8 feet tall. That's pretty much uniform throughout the city. The applicants requested a total height of 18 feet. It would be an 8-foot tall sign total, including both portions of the sign, the lighted but non-digital, and then also the digital. Now there's a diagram I'll show you in a moment that outlines that. It would be on top of a 10-foot pole, and then also the current land development regulations limit the face of the sign to 50 square feet per side for a total of 100 square feet. And they requested a little bit larger than that at 61 square feet for 122 total. And so the sign they're proposing, there's a diagram there, would be a total from the ground to the very top of the sign of 18 feet. The dimensions of the lighted sign, as you can see, are 5 by 8, and then the digital sign is 3 by 7. As for the scrolling text, actually the land development regulations call for no more frequent change of text than once per minute, and so we wouldn't actually allow the flashing, constantly scrolling sign anyway. It would be one message can come up and can last up there for at least 60 seconds and then can change to another message, so it's not a distraction to drivers as they go by. Just to give you some perspective on the sign, it is a little bit larger, it is a little bit higher than what we currently allow, but this is the Hardee's sign, which I don't have the exact measurements, but we estimate it's 12 to 13 feet high total. The Hardee's portion there is about 5 feet tall by 10 feet wide. Likewise, the marquee portion down below is 3 feet tall by 6 feet wide, and it looks like to be on a 5 or 6 foot tall pedestal. If you, and this is not perfectly to scale, but I just wanted to give you some perspective. If you looked at what's being proposed, it's going to be roughly that size there. It's actually a little bit smaller than the Hardee's sign in overall dimension, but it would be a little bit taller than the Hardee's sign in height. Here's a picture of the actual site in question. There's the red wall that he was mentioning that blocks the view of the lighted wall sign. And so, again, not perfectly to scale, but roughly to give you a feel of where the proposed location would be. This gives them, back up.
So that's on the proposed location is on the east side of his building. It's in between
Correct, yes, sir.
the clinic and the thrift shop.
Yes, sir. And so that gives you the minimum 10-foot clearance they need for to the power lines, and I think it's about 14 feet to the building itself, roughly. As mentioned earlier already, staff has proposed that we do have a number of concerns about having it right in the middle of a parking lot like that. It's not uncommon for signs like that to be hit by cars. Also, too, because of the narrow nature of the driveway here, it is going to shared parking lot, and so that would potentially impede people being able to sort of back out and turn and then go out forward instead of having to back out onto Newberry Road, because we're already very close to the busy intersection. So we think having the ability to continue travel through there is valuable. And so, as mentioned, the staff has suggested an alternate location, which would be over in this corner.
How high is the building?
I believe the height of the building is about 12 to 14 feet.
So if you put it there, the building would impede the sign if you're coming
If we put it in
from
this corner,
Gainesville. Yeah.
it would impede it as opposed to being in that location. That's definitely, there's no question, has better visibility. We think that the corner is a compromise that still provides pretty good visibility from the same locations, with one exception, which I'll outline in the next in a coming slide.
Can you stay on that for just as a this light pole here? Is it oriented at the break between the thrift shop and the?
It's roughly about where we
So
believe the sign
if it
is.
was on the ground down here, you would have that visibility without losing, and you would have that as an obstruction to hopefully not hit it,
If
and that would put it back down on the ground so it wouldn't be so.
it would still have to, it couldn't be placed in the actual right-of-way, which extends to roughly about there.
That's
And so
the sidewalk.
that's the sidewalk there, yes, sir. And so it would still have to be back from the right-of-way. They'd still, the top corner, if it was an 8-foot freestanding sign, not on a pole, would still have to be 10 feet from the nearest line up there. So it would be somewhere in this area. But as far as visibility goes for the signage, a lot of it would be blocked by anybody who was parking next to it, in front of it there, on either side. So it wouldn't really serve the purpose intended for the clinic that they're requesting. It's just a little bit different angle that you can see, and so there's additional parking over here. There's no other structures over here that the sign would impede with or be blocked by on that angle. So we get back to the sign that nobody could see in black and white. Again, my apologies. So if you look at the aerial, you're somewhere in the 380 to 400 foot range if you're at the stop bars headed north on State Road 45. You have open sight lines from this location. Likewise, you have open sight lines from the westbound on State Road 26 location. When you get over here to the southbound on State Road 45 is where you start to have some impediment. The staff recommended location is pretty much completely blocked from this point over here at the stop bars. You would probably be able to see a fair amount of the sign from the stop bars if you were headed south. The thought there, though, is if you're in the right-hand turn lane, you're about to go right past the sign anyway, so that's not actually going to be an impediment. And if you're headed south, likelihood is you're not looking to the west as you're driving through the intersection. You should be facing forward. You're not going to see it anyway. So that was the consideration there. But you've got good sight lines from the two primary locations that you'd be approaching from. And so here's a view from the stop bars on the northbound lane on State Road 45. As you can see, the signage would be in this roughly in this area here, and actually in the proposed location, the directional signs here would probably block a good portion of it. Headed west on State Road 26, again, the locations would be right about here, roughly the same. And then here's at the stop bar headed south on State Road 45. So from this angle, you definitely wouldn't be able to see the staff's proposed location. You probably could see a good portion of the proposed location from the applicant, though. So, all things being considered there, staff's recommendation is to approve the total sign height of 18 feet. And I want to go back to several months ago, we did have a workshop with the then commission. There's been a little bit of a change in the commission since then, but the general consensus was that they wanted us to loosen the sign regulations that we currently have, that they were too limiting for the businesses that wanted to have a little bit larger, a little bit higher signs in certain locations. This is staff's opinion. This is one of those locations that warrants consideration for a sign on a pole, just because of the things that the applicants mentioned as far as visibility. We think that if you were to try to do some sort of a 8-foot tall freestanding pole in the middle of the parking lot there, it really would not serve. It wouldn't serve a purpose of visibility for the client or for the applicant, because it would be blocked by a lot of the parked cars that would be next to it. Also, too, it would be even more vulnerable than a sign on a pole to being hit, unless it had some kind of good barrier or barricade of some sort around it. And so just because some of the unique features of this particular location, we think it actually makes sense to have to grant the variance to raise it up as high as they requested. The other reason for that, too, is, as you mentioned, the applicant mentioned, not only do you need to have your clearance so that vehicle traffic can go through without potentially hitting the sign itself on top of the pole, but also, for instance, in the downtown area where you have you can have canopy signs and projection signs coming out over the buildings. There's a minimum height of 9 feet required for those as well, and so you want to have at least that 9-foot clearance to the bottom of the sign for whether it's automotive traffic or pedestrian traffic. And so raising it up on the pole would also serve that purpose in the alternative location we've recommended, because part of that's going to hang out over the sidewalk. It's there on the not the sidewalk that runs next to the street, but the sidewalk that comes out of the building itself, in front of the building. And so, if you didn't have that height and that clearance, not only do you lose your visibility, but also you lose the ability to get out of the way of pedestrians that might have a ladder or something, or that kind of thing. So, staff
Brian,
does,
would this be the tallest sign if it got approved? Would this be the tallest sign in Newberry?
honestly, Mr. Brewer, I don't have a
The only other one I think could come close would be Jam sign. Jam's maybe 18.
There are some that, quite a few of the signs, in fact, most of the signs in the city actually would be considered non-conforming based on our current code, because they existed prior to the adoption of the current code. And so there are quite a few that are higher, but I think it would certainly be one of the highest, if not the highest, at that point.
Okay.
And so, go.
Is that the end of your presentation?
It wasn't, but
No, I'm sorry.
sorry too. The technical glitch.
That tornado,
So-
it causes some problems,
There we go.
from a tropical storm.
We'll do the quick click. Okay, so staff does recommend approval of the total sign height up to 18 feet. We also would recommend approval for the total square footage of the sign face to be up to 61 square foot on each side, for a total of 122. We think that actually conforms with the will that the commission expressed when they told us to go back and draft a new sign ordinance, which we're working on but have not got ready for prime time. So we think, though, that definitely probably fits within the spirit of the direction we were given when we were told to redraft the ordinance, making it more business friendly. However, we do also recommend moving the location out of the parking area into the grass area adjacent to the building. We think that there's adequate visibility in that location, and it eliminates the problems that come from having a pole sign in the middle of the parking lot. If the commission, if the board and the commission do, though, grant the location requested by the applicant, we would request that as a condition of the approval of the variance, that they have to put some kind of adequate barriers or of some sort down below to keep the sign from getting run into.
Brian, can you, before you wrap up, can you speak to the miscommunication?
Yes, sir. At the time we first spoke, we thought that we were going to have a new sign ordinance prepared and ready to go, and the miscommunication was that I did not express that in the absence of that we would need to go through the variance process to get approval, and so
Was the miscommunication about the location or about the size?
size and
The size. So y'all hadn't got to the location part.
I discussed that with the applicant before, and he went back to the actual owner, DSM Holdings, and talked to them about it, and they said they wanted to stick with where they're proposing.
Okay.
So,
Because I agree with you. I think the size difference that you've proposed, I don't think the commission is going to have a problem with that aspect of it. I think the location and the height would be the issues probably for this board as well. Okay. Questions for staff, Mr. Boyer.
Well, actually, I think probably have more questions for the applicant.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for staff? Miss Jessica.
So, I know in discussions about other signs in the area, Walker's Produce Stand having lights, that there was discussion about how it would impact the residents behind there. How bright will this be? Will it impact the residential area?
Staff doesn't believe that's actually going to be an impact to the residential areas around it, simply because the lighted portion signs will be facing east and west, and the residential lies north and south and behind a block behind, and so we don't actually think there's going to be any light or glare impacts. If there were, then we'd have to go back to the applicant and have them tone down the brightness or something along those lines. But just because of the way it faces up and down Newberry Road, we don't think there's actually going to be any impacts from that.
Mr. Boyer.
You mentioned our future sign ordinances. With what you're working on currently for the proposed sign code, does this still exceed the limitations that you're looking at in the next sign code that you're working on?
If it does, it probably would only exceed it by a small amount. We think that in certain locations, and one of the ideas that we're working on is that certain areas would have sort of form-based code rather than one size fits all, which is what we have right now. And so, for instance, on a 4-lane divided highway like State Road 45 it would make more sense to have a higher allowance. And even to the extent where you've got a property like this, which is within a block adjacent to that major arterial roadway, allowing for a little bit higher signage for visibility as people do traverse back and forth. But then as you get farther away from that, then you go down to a lower standard. Just because we did have one person who came into the office. They wanted to put a sign 25 foot tall and 100 square foot on each side, about 3 blocks in from the intersection, so that you could still see it from the intersection. Well, that was something obviously that didn't really make a whole lot of sense, especially since it approached the historic district as well, getting into that area. But something like this, which is much smaller and not quite so high, but still could provide visibility from the main road as people traverse back and forth, probably it would be something I think that would conform to what will probably propose in the draft ordinance. So.
All right.
Mr. Herson.
Brian, and you kind of alluded to this. Do we know how many signs currently exceed the code in the city?
It's about 50%.
At least 50%, perhaps more. Again, though, they exceed it, but they're all grandfathered in because they existed long before the current.
And they all exceeded it in different ways.
Yes,
Right.
some are too high, some are too
Too
big.
large, as the
Yes,
Hardy
yeah,
sign.
that kind of thing.
Is there a code for how far the sign has to be from the building? I guess my point is, can it be moved closer to the building so it would fall more in line with the the profile of the building rather than
There's a couple of things that
being
could
a
be.
flag out there.
There's a couple of ideas that could be floated. Not being a sign contractor, I don't know about the engineering behind it. Perhaps if it was more of a flag design where it instead of being centered on the pole, it actually looked like a flag
Came
stuck
out
out
from the building.
further from the edge of the sidewalk there, area there. It could certainly be brought closer to the building, but that actually impedes your sight lines further.
Okay.
So the further out it is,
The better.
increase in the sight line you get.
Ms. Jessica?
Is the concern with the staff proposed location that vehicles won't be able to read the text since the signage itself is above the building line, that the digital text falls below the,
I imagine that may be part of the question, issue. That'd be more to the applicant, but it's probably part of the consideration, yes.
Brian, can we go back to a picture of the location? Because I'm not in favor of either one of these locations. Neither one of them seem to, but that's fine. This parking lot has never made a lot of sense. People use this as a driveway, and they come in this way. Would it be possible to put the sign on this side and prevent that access, and then that would not impede, you wouldn't have it right in the middle of anybody, but it wouldn't be over here in the grass, which would now impede the view of the lettering. He gets it in the middle where he wants it, but not in the middle separating two businesses, and we prevent people from using this as a driveway through here.
Mr. Mayor, you could absolutely do something like that. In fact, you could have an 8-foot tall monolithic sign out, freestanding out here with some sort of a planter or something around it for protection that definitively closes off the
Closes that
driveway so people could no longer drive through. You
Yeah.
could do that. That certainly would be a viable option.
That would be my preferred. That way, clearly, you pull in this way to the driveway, you stop that kind of motion. It seems to be the best compromise. I don't know that we're going to figure out something. Anytime you're dealing with signs, you can't make everybody happy. If you do not grant the variance, then you're not small business friendly. If you do grant the variance, then every other person on this road who has not gotten the variance is going to be calling you up, saying, "Why didn't I get mine? I want an 18-foot sign too."
And once you do it,
Once you do it, you can't go back.
That's
you
one of
know?
my notes, is it sets a precedence
Yeah.
for everybody else to raise their signs.
Yeah.
Well, and if
But-
you, Mr. Mayor, if you did something like that, again, as a compromise, you could, if there was, the new owners somehow blocked this off and then put the sign here, perhaps you could still elevate it higher than the current 8-foot standard, just not as high as the 18.
Not as high as 18.
Because then it has a more prominent location out on its own, and like you said, it's not in between the two businesses.
What I was
Ms. Boyer.
thinking of is a location like you were, blocking off that egress right there, on, elevating it to a 12-foot height, because you no longer need the 18-foot height because you're not driving vehicles underneath it. And that was, I'm sure that was the reason why they requested 18-foot, because they wanted to be able to move vehicles underneath it and not block any of the flow. But this keeps us down within our height. It takes care of a nuisance as far as people using that as
As a
a
pass
cut through or a path, and it still gives them visibility. From the corner, it gives them good visibility westbound, and it's that location right there still has good visibility when you're going northbound. So I mean,
It would certainly be something staff would get behind and support. You might want to hear from the applicant. And again, not being an actual sign contractor, there may be some logistical issues that he could address as far as that suggestion goes.
Any other questions from the board to staff?
Do we have any code that would prevent a sign on top of the building?
Yes, we do. That's one thing that's under the expressly prohibited category, which probably would not recommend changing in the future as a particular category. There's some things that of this current sign code that do work, and I think that's probably one of them.
My last question for you, Brian, he's already made a sign, so it's sitting there in a storehouse somewhere waiting for us to to make a decision here. What is the pros and cons of simply waiting until we actually get the new sign ordinance so that we know for sure what we're dealing with and what we're granting a variance for? What's the timeline before that new ordinance? Is it just an issue of visibility to the business until?
The number of issues, visibility to the business, it leaves the contractor kind of sitting out there and waiting in the wings until we finish our work, which could potentially be several more months. And then also too, as a new business coming into the city, we certainly have a vested interest in their success, and so something that whatever we can do that would help them along in that respect, but not be too far. Again, maybe the compromise of a more prominent location blocking off the driveway, but not quite as tall or something, is a good compromise in the middle that gives them kind of the best of both worlds until we work it out.
Any other questions for staff from the board? Okay, seeing none, applicant now has the opportunity for rebuttal of any testimony. I think we all would like to hear your opinion of that compromise position.
Well, it's interesting that you'd like to block that drive off. I just was working to build a new building behind my shop. And one of the requirements of DOT was that I had to do a cross-traffic pavement from one end of my property to the other, parallel with the road. It's a requirement of DOT. They want people to be able to drive across my property. And I said, no, isn't that what the road's for? And no, that's not the idea they have.
Yeah.
So I don't know where that would fit in, but what we would like is to keep it on the east end, to be closer to the intersection for the readability of the digital sign. It is a small sign. It's not going to be read from a great distance. One thing I think would be a good compromise is if we did move it close to the building. I don't have any problem with that. We could get right up with it actually hanging over the sidewalk somewhat towards the back, and that would make it much easier for cars to park and get in and out. And
When
it
you
would
say
still
the
be
back,
fun.
you mean
Towards the building, towards the north.
towards the building, but east, not on the south.
Keeping it in the same location, but moving it north.
Where that van is.
Well, yeah, it would be this side of the van now. We have a 5-foot setback from the side property line, I believe, so we have to be 5 foot this side of the van, or the property line.
I mean, I could get on board with if you could put it up against the building
Yes.
and then where it doesn't go above the building,
Yeah,
but it's above
well-
the cars. I think I
Yeah.
could get on board with that because that would give you the visibility. But
Well, we would still want to maintain that, because it would still overhang the driveway. We'd still need to have that height to keep cars from hitting it. So
because it's 8 feet,
It's 10 feet
so
to the
yeah,
bottom.
that's
And actually, the location is the one thing we're not asking for a variance on. That isn't, permitted spot according to your code.
it's a permitted spot to have it right in the middle of the parking lot.
Mr. Mayor, it is permitted to have it there, but because they're asking for a variance to the sign height and the sign size, you can make it a condition of approval that it goes to a different location if you choose.
It's amazing what government allows and what they don't allow. It's fine to put a sign right in the middle of a parking lot, but
You can't have it too
And
high.
we-
can't have it too high.
We could protect it with a
A barrier.
full of concrete at the
Sure.
end of the overhang, so the car couldn't hit.
But that effectively cuts off any entrance to the clinic from any other egress other than the one directly in front of the building.
No, we would be opening that up more. We would be
Oh,
more
if you pushed it back north, closer
Towards
to
the
the building.
building.
Towards the building, yeah.
towards the building. So cars could,
Would-
there'd be
would,
plenty of
uh,
room for cars to get.
Are we,
The pole would be close to the front of the
Of the
wheel
sidewalk.
of the van there.
so like closer to the edge of the sidewalk?
Yes.
But the sign would still overhang.
Yeah, about 4 feet.
So you're saying the I'm still not clear of the height of the building. The pole would go up to clear the building, and part of the sign would be over the building, and
No,
part of the sign
no,
would be this way.
I don't think the building
No?
is, I think the building's too tall for that. We could do that, but we'd have to raise the sign even higher.
Yeah.
And we have done that in the past. We did that in Silver Springs for the same client,
Where is parking for the clinic? Is it all on the side?
in the front and the side.
So there is parking in the front of this.
It just hadn't been used in a long time, this parking lot. There's about 3 on the side, on the left side there.
Well, I don't think we'd have a problem with FDOT about shutting that down, because that seems strange to me. And what happens is people go in there that long ways, and they end up taking up 2 or 3 parking spots,
Now-
and then they want to use it as sort of a U-turn to go around, and it's a.
That's
Now,
why we
is
don't have
it-
to back out on 26.
But if they go in straight, then they've
Got to back out, yeah.
If we made the condition where they blocked off this, would they be able to remove that sidewalk and open parking?
Outside.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Pull
I mean, that's
parking
not-
in
that's
there. I
not
know
your,
that wouldn't be
I don't know that.
him, he's just here for the sign, but
Yeah.
I know when I pull in there, the few times I've been there, it's convenient for me to pull out this way and turn left to the
And not-
stop sign, so I'm sitting
Well,
at the stop sign.
I'm thinking because it's open egress here on the side. But what we're trying to do, in addition to granting you permission to put a sign up there, we're also looking to maybe stop this flow. And if the entrance is over here, that tends to slow it down, just people zipping through there.
Yeah, personally, I like that idea of taking that sidewalk out over there.
I would take this, if it was my business, I would take the sidewalk out and encourage
And I
people to
will
park over there.
recommend that to Dr. St. Martin. I don't know that.
It-
I can't
Mr.
say.
Chair, if I could
Yes, Mr.
interject
Attorney,
for
please.
just a second.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ideas that are going around that may be satisfactory to the applicant and satisfactory to this board. This board is an advisory board of the city commission, and the city commission will then make their decision. There's a couple of things that bother me from the legal side of it, which is the scrolling sign with a sign over the above that, which is, as I understand it, about 8 feet in height, as the signage is depicted on.
Total of 8
Total
feet, yes.
is, right. And I understand we're kind of zoning in progress, and we're looking at our sign ordinance, and we're trying to come up with something that is more satisfactory to our commission, and they've given that as a directive to staff. Granting a variance to put it up 18 feet is as this board has said, is problematic, because then all the property owners along the way have a potential claim to say, well, wait a minute, what are we doing here? Variances are typically not granted for self-imposed hardships. So that's another legal concept that is problematic here. The other thought process is increasing it with a base with the signage. If it's 8 foot and we have a base that's erect, now we're over the 8 feet. So that's another problem. And again, we're kind of running into that self-imposed hardship idea. The sidewalk idea seems to be getting rid of a portion of that sidewalk perhaps may solve some of the problems that you have in figuring out placement of the sign in an adequate area that would survive or gain approval of this group. This group has the ability to approve your request tonight, deny it tonight, or table it to a date certain in the future. We can table it to our next meeting, table it to a special time certain. But it seems like we're trying to work out a lot of issues with you in a positive manner to be business friendly, as our chair said, but also work within the constraints of our ordinances. And that's a lot to do
On the fly.
at a meeting on the fly, and ultimately what I've found in my experience is when we do that on the fly, we have a bad decision, either bad decision from your perspective or a bad decision from other property owners, or it's just bad all the way around, and rarely do you have something good that comes of that. My suggestion would be, from a staff's point of view, to work with you further to come up with a plan that is viable. We can check DOT regulations in the interim and see what we need to do from DOT. Maybe this idea just can't be done,
Right.
as our mayor said, with DOT regulations. Perhaps it can be, and it presents a very viable option to us. So my suggestion would be to try to work within the constraints of our ordinance and not have something that is as attacked by other citizenry to say, look, you violated your ordinance for no good reason, and now I want the same relief, and we're just in a real pickle then. So that would be my suggestion, Mr. Mayor.
I think the attorney makes a good point. Right now, I've got a lot of questions, and we're throwing out a lot of good ideas, but it just does work a whole lot better now that you've heard some of the ideas that this board has. I guarantee you the commission's going to have a lot of the same sort of ideas. Would you like to table it so that you can work out with staff and come back with a proposal that might have a more positive result?
Well, I'd like to address the attorney's comments first. The signs that are existing in the city are, as said, probably better than 50% don't comply with the code. So it's not just like this sign's going to be a great big 18-foot sign. You have the Hardy sign, which is, I think, as tall or real close to the same height, and much more square footage that was allowed. Now, variance must have been.
I remember that fight. That was many years ago. I was a child,
Well,
but
this is a brand new sign.
but it was
Brand
but-
new building.
well, the sign is not. But once you're in, and Brian can speak to that. I remember that was one of the big battles of bringing Hardee's in and you were probably on staff at that time. But the issue isn't about the signs that are here that are out of compliance. The issue is about continuing the problem. So which was the point of my question to staff about, how long are we waiting here for the sign ordinance? Because I'm always hesitant to approve a variance when we're in the midst of changing the ordinance, because then we could come up with something that's detrimental. We approve something and then the ordinance doesn't, and now you have even a bigger grief because you say, wait a minute, you guys just approved this and now you're telling me it doesn't fly. I didn't mean to cut you off though but I understand your point about there are other signs. I'll grant you that one, but we don't want to compound the issue.
Okay, well, my point was that it wasn't the first one that's opening the door for everybody to want bigger signs. My client's ready to open this office, and he knows the importance of the pole signs. We've had issues where the offices didn't open with freestanding signs in the past, and didn't have good visibility, and it severely restricts the building or the business being successful. What I would like, if nothing else, is to have it approved in staff's location per their recommendations. And I can go to my client, and I have discussed that location with him, and I think he would probably go along with that. I don't see that being an issue. Because we need to get something up, and we need to get the building, the business open.
Does that conclude your rebuttal?
Yes.
Does anyone have any further questions for the applicant? Ms. Jessica?
What will the digital text be advertising on the sign?
On some of the other locations, it says, no insurance, no problem, sick now, seen now, school physicals, open 7 days, the hour sometimes, things, but they're short and they're up and then they're gone. They're not long, drawn out, flashy here.
Any other questions for the applicant? Okay, hearing none. Thank you, sir. We will now open the floor for public comment, with each comment, our presentation being limited to 5 minutes. Anybody here in the audience tonight that would like to make a comment on this issue? Okay. Seeing none, would the applicant like to make any closing arguments? We didn't have any other comments, so okay. All right, the public hearing is now closed, and the board will enter into deliberations. As I said before, there's no way you can decide this issue and make everybody happy. This is one of those doors you just can't solve. I do know all three of the other businesses in that building have vocalized many concerns about their the signs and the sign ordinances and their inability to put up something like this applicant is asking to put up. So I would certainly anticipate having all those conversations again. So that's kind of my deliberations. I'm real conflicted on these kinds of issues. I do want to be business friendly, and I understand what the applicant is saying about the linkage between the success of a business and a sign. But this would be just about the tallest sign in Newberry, and I'm not really stoked about either of those staff's currently proposed location or their proposed location. Neither of those look very good to me. Thoughts, deliberations?
Yeah, I don't get excited about the idea, just because we have signs out of compliance, that we should allow another one. I don't think that's a valid argument. It doesn't work with anything else in life.
And I've got a problem setting precedents. It opens Pandora's box, it opens the floodgates, and you allow it. You can't therefore say no to anybody else that comes in ahead of you. We don't know where the sign ordinance is going to be when they do finalize the new one. So will it still be out of code?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, I've got questions and concerns about both locations as proposed by staff and the petitioner's location. So,
Well, hearing the tone of the comments, would you like to perhaps table it so that staff can work out another proposed compromise and bring it back? Or are you ready to?
not ready
Not
to
to
make a
end up
motion. Not ready to make a
deliberations
motion
yet.
at this point yet, but I would probably recommend, if we were going to make a motion on it, we did throw out a lot of good ideas. Perhaps he can go back to the owner and discuss that, come back and work with staff, since he's got some feedback, and then possibly we can take it up again.
Mr. Herson?
I guess questions from a procedural standpoint, we could either vote up or down, or we could table it for a later discussion to see what kind of alternatives are brought forward.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor. That's exactly right.
Ms. Jessica, Ms. Wanda, are those all the thoughts that have been vocalized in line with your thoughts, or Ms. Jessica?
I agree with Mr. Boyer here.
Mr. Boyer, Ms. Jessica?
I'm more comfortable with tabling this, as opposed to the two proposed sites that are actually on the table, versus making a hasty decision that then the commission has problems with.
I mean, I always hate to just close the door on somebody when there are other compromise ideas out there. But I don't like either one of these, and as Mr. Boyer said about setting precedent, everybody will come and say,
And unfortunately, he's not in the position to make the decisions that we
Right.
are suggesting on.
yeah,
So
it's an awkward spot.
it is.
Well,
I'm very pro-business and would do almost everything we possibly could to help make a business successful. But I would think that it would need to be tabled, and he would have to have further discussion.
Yeah, I mean,
Because the alternative is, if it was an up or down vote, he could if it was not in his favor, he could come back with a different application, correct? He could fix it, come back.
he could, but then he'd have to start all over again. If we table it now, we can take up right where we're at this point. Is that correct, Mr. Thomas?
Yes, Mr. Chair, that's correct. If you table it, then we can keep things where they're at and then pick up the conversation and the discussion.
If we vote it down, then we've sent a very clear signal to the commission that we're not in favor of any of these ideas.
Right.
I'm not sure that's the message that I'm hearing tonight.
I just want to have that conversation so we all,
Right.
Everybody's
Make a
aware of-
motion.
I think we're heading towards one. Go ahead, sir.
Make a motion that this be tabled until a point in time where he can come back with, and maybe take our ideas and then come back and we can take this back up,
Okay.
upon further communication with staff.
All right, I hear a motion to table until further communication with staff. Do I have a second?
A second.
I have a second from Ms. Jessica. Any further comment from the audience? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. This will bring the quasi-judicial to a close. All right. And that was the only item on this agenda. Okay, we'll move on to item 6. Thank you, sir. Any topics for member discussion tonight? We still have one more meeting. You can bring up topics at the end of that one as well.
Just a reiteration, I guess, given this topic, the sooner we can get a sign ordinance in place, the better, because I think the attorney's point of self-imposed hardships should be examined by all of our businesses as they come forward. We want to be business-friendly, but don't put yourself in a hard position and make us make a choice.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. This is something that I've been dealing with for 7 years now, something like that. And so I appreciate staff being slow and meticulous, and let's get it right this time. And I really like the idea that Mr. Thomas said about let's figure out something that's use specific, so it's not a one size fits all. I think that's a great approach, but the sooner the better. So, any other topics for member discussion? Hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Adjourned. All right, don't go anywhere. All right. Now we will call to order this July 3rd Historic Architectural Review Board meeting. We'll begin with an approval of the agenda, then we'll have approval of the HARP minutes of June 5th, 2017. We have no old business, and our new business tonight is a presentation on historic preservation in Newberry and how the historic architectural review process works, which will adhere to our time limit. And then under item B, we'll have CA 1701, an application by the City of Newberry owner for a certificate of appropriateness to demolish a deteriorated historic structure known as the Kincaid Building or Kincaid Store, located at 25370 West Newberry Road within the Newberry Historic District. Then we'll have topics from members for a discussion, and then we will adjourn. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
I have a motion from Mr. Boyer. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second from Ms. Jessica. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion passes unanimous. Okay. Approval of the HARP minutes of June 5th. Does anybody have any chance to review those minutes? Have any changes to them? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
I have a motion from Mr. Hersom. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Ms. Jessica. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. All right, under new, we have no old business. So under new business, Mr. Thomas, you going to have a presentation? Or is that Ms. Wendy?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chair, the presentation will be by Wendy Kinzer, Principal Planner for the City of Newberry.
All right. I'm sure you've got this down 15 minutes and 49 seconds, right?
First I have to know what I'm doing here. All right, so is this on?
Yes.
Okay. Glad to be here. It's better than not being here, right?
That's
'Cause you're having
right.
a great time?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, first, just want to start out with a presentation on historic preservation in Newberry. We'll just talk a little bit about what's been going on, how we got where we are, and then briefly go over the certificate of appropriateness, kind of the historic architectural review process, which is what you had to consider and what the application has to go through for this next item, the certificate of appropriateness for the Kincaid building that's being requested. So to start, first, pretty much looking at the history of Newberry's historic district. As we go on, you can look and see some of these buildings that you can recognize. Well, you can see that back in 1986, we got a grant and we went ahead and conducted a survey, which is what originally established the historic district. And more than 70 buildings were added, and the database for the state was these properties were all added to that through the historic district, because as a recommendation of the survey was to establish an actual historic district. And that district is based on all the buildings that are in there that contribute to the historic significance, either aesthetically or architecturally, some aspect of that of your district. Then to be considered, you looked at the age. Anything over 50 years of age, or in integrity, pretty much does it look like it used to look, and is it significant in some way to Newberry's history, whether through people or an event or something like that. It can be any of those things contributing to that. And then the district came about as a result of that grant and that survey, and it extends from 260th Street over to that's Northwest 260th Street over to Northwest 252nd, and then it goes down to Southwest 2nd Avenue about, and then also, and where are we? Southwest 2nd, and then the Northwest 2nd, it goes up that way. So we're looking at the district. We've got the Prestwick Properties building where Joy Glanzer's office is, and then the other building to your on the right of the screen is further down on Newberry Road to the west of where we are now. So after that district was established, the addresses of buildings, things changed. Some of the contributing structures changed. Some were demolished, and some things had changes made that were not consistent with historic district. And as a result, to ensure the accuracy of our district, we went ahead and applied for a grant to update the survey. And then as a result of that, we went through all the site file forms, which is part of the master site file in the state of Florida, which is their record of all the different properties in the state. And came up with, you see there's a site file, there's an example. Normally when you apply to be on the Florida site file, master site file registry, that you have a picture, you have your photo of that, your map, your location, you have all the details about your property. And then also the Sanborn maps contribute to how you locate properties. Those were originally the fire insurance maps, and those those maps were done for over 12,000 different counties, cities throughout the state. They used to be, that was it, and they were very detailed for the fire insurance. That's what we rely on a lot now for any of these mapping things. As a result of the survey, we came up with all kinds of maps and photos and information that would help us and help you, as in tonight, in making your decision about historic resources. The survey helped produce, one of the things we did is we put together a walking tour brochure and a historical resources survey report, and that those are both available if you would be interested in those, and we'd be glad to supply those to you. They're also available at the county, at the city's different offices. And so they help to show the architectural details and materials that were used in the different buildings that are in the historic district. The survey also is used to support the Newberry Main Street program, which is a branch of the, it's overseen by the state's Division of Historical Resources. And the Main Street helps to implement those policies for historic preservation in maintaining your downtown and improving and encouraging economic development and revitalizing the downtowns. Another purpose of the survey results and that information that we put together will also help with the Certified Local Government program. As the city of Newberry is a certified local government, we talked about that at our last meeting, and because of that, these kind of details showing that we do have historic structures and a historic district, and that we have a historic board who's reviewing these items, that helps contribute. The CLG, remember, program helps us to apply for monies that are federal, state funds to help with historic preservation. The other thing is sharing this kind of information. There are other programs, tax credits, things that we would want to make available or make known and assist anybody who's interested in applying for something like that. The other thing is helping to have people learn about what historic preservation is, and then how our district really contributes to that, and what the difference is for each of those buildings that's called a historic building, and how they contribute to the historic district. And we have in the past had a couple workshops for the citizens held over at the Newberry Main Street office to help with spreading the news about historic preservation, helping educate people, and then having things on our website. Even had a contest for the children for the schools to be able to provide drawings of the Little Red Schoolhouse that we did. So all kinds of things. But that, essentially that, is just to give you a brief, really quick overview of the
You did a great job.
preservation process.
Yeah.
Okay. We also have a presentation on the historic architectural review process and how it relates to our application that we're seeing tonight. Let's see. Can I get to the next presentation? The next one, and the reason why I thought we'd do it this way, because remember, one of the things we were going to talk about is the whole architectural review process. And since you've got an application before you tonight, I thought we could look at those in relationship to the application that's before you. Essentially, let's see if we go. Do we have that? Okay, if we don't have it.
You have to do it all from memory.
I don't
Every
need-
slide.
I don't need it. Pretty much what we're saying is that when you look at the different historic buildings, and as you have one before you that's requesting a demolition permit, you're looking at, you have to review the construction, demolition, and they have to supply you with an application that provides information about why they need that permit and why other kinds of uses don't work. And economically, it doesn't make it feasible to maintain the building as it is. So in the process that you go through for review of construction and any alterations, remember that anything that's done as a repair, a normal repair that doesn't require some other kind of permit, they'd have to get those from the building department. But if it doesn't require anything particular, it's a maintenance issue, then you're not going to have you're not going to have a request for a certificate of appropriateness before you. Now, if this is ordinary repairs and maintenance, if in this case, when they're asking for a permit for demolition, as in this case, they have to request this from the appropriate agency, which is you, the Historic Architectural Review Board. And in that case, the next slide is a trick slide, and it's really not there. Is there a way to go to the next slide? The changes with Newberry's Historic District. Okay, if we look at that, anything that gets requested that's a change that is visible from the exterior, visible from the street, then those are the kind of changes that would go before you, and they're not just routine maintenance. And then the application process is where they submit any applicant, including the City of Newberry, for their own buildings. They would submit a drawing of the proposed work, a photograph of what they intend to do or of the issues that they're facing, and any information about the building materials. And in this case, we're being asked, or you are being asked, about a decision to make having to do with the demolition, which is a little bit different than saying here are the materials and things I'm going to change. Remember that any decision that you make through the public hearing process, you have another 45 days if you need to get additional information, or if you negotiate with the applicant to do so, you can get that other information. Now, all of these regulations, I think, are available to you online, and some of them were provided to you in your packet. If the HARB didn't act in time within those 45 days, then the request is deemed to have been issued and approved. You've got criteria that you have to consider for when you're approving or denying an application, and you can approve or deny an application, approving with conditions or with findings and conditions, or you can deny and you can specify those findings as well. The effect of the proposed work has to be considered, the relationship between the work and the structures surrounding them within the district, the extent in which the historic, the significance is being affected by this change, and whether denying this certificate of appropriateness would actually deprive the owner of a beneficial use, and whether the plans that can be reasonably carried out by the applicant. So if you were asking someone to do something that was way beyond their means or was cost prohibitive, then that would be something to think about before you recommended that. In granting that certificate of appropriateness, when you're looking at demolition, you have to decide, looking at the economic impact, and then there are times when you may consider going ahead and granting a demolition permit, even if it were significant, depending on the other types of issues that face you. So, a few questions that people have asked having to do with properties that are in the Newberry Historic District, because all of the properties that you have that are a part of the district all have master site files. They have site files in the state of Florida, and each of those, so there's a record, and you have a historic district that's on the National Register, and that makes that all the buildings within that are designated on that list in our local ordinance, that those are contributing structures, meaning they have something to do, they contribute to the historic significance of that district. So people wonder sometimes, well, if I want to demolish a building, is there something that's going to keep me from doing that? The state law, federal law, and the answer is really it's up to the locality. So unless that particular building is receiving funding, that's state or federal monies, then they have restrictions that they have to comply with. Can you have a building that's removed from the master site file? And no, even if the owner asks for it, just because it's public information that was gathered about a building, historical significance, that kind of thing, and then you wouldn't take it off the record. But remember that the owner and the information about that person or entity is not divulged and not kept on the site files as a public record. Not that someone couldn't look it up, but technically it's not part of the actual site file. So if it changed hands, it doesn't get recorded. And restrictions on development of any historic property that's in your historic district, there's only restrictions are what we have in our local ordinance, and what comes before you to decide if it's consistent with the district and if it makes sense as far as economic impact. So, okay, so then we go through. Are we ready for the application?
We're ready. Yep.
So
Are we moving on to B?
Yeah, we're moving on
Okay.
to B. So you have an application before you that the City of Newberry has proposed based on their research, their structural analyses, asbestos study for the Kincaid building. And that building, the Kincaid store, or the Kincaid store building as people know it, has gotten increasingly deteriorated. Originally, it was built in 1880 and used as a mercantile. It was moved to Newberry around 1900 on rolling logs that were pulled by mules. So it's got quite a history, and it was moved to the exact location where it is now. Problem is that who was going to use that building? The city went ahead and purchased it for $152,000 in 2007, March 2007, and as a result of that, the Newberry Main Street said, hey, we'll take on that building, let us lease it, and then we'll try to get money from the state, apply for grants to help rehabilitate this, because in looking at how much it was going to cost to fix this up, it was quite expensive. We were looking at $150,000, $200,000, and it could have been a lot more, and at least $50,000 just to stabilize the structure, because you had to look at it to see if we could even get people in it. So Main Street went through trying to look at that. We helped together looking for monies, applying for funding, and it did not come to fruition.
And now the building cannot be. We've got the structural reports back, and we can't fix the building anymore. So
and it's deteriorated further from the original structural report that was done back in 2008. So now we have more damage, more problem, and it's really become a safety hazard.
So when people ask, well, can't we just put $200,000 into it and restore it? At this point, even if you had $200,000, we can't save the building. Now we can try to save some of the wood out of it, which is the other most dominant question that you'll get with the Kincaid building, and we are working to try to save some of those beams of the rafters so that we still have a piece of it, but the building itself cannot be. I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just trying to get to the...
That's true. The City Commission did discuss this. They had a facilities report and went through that information and looked at the same reports that you were provided as part of your packet. And at that time, they directed staff to look into the demolition, to go ahead and proceed with that process.
They voted to demolish the building.
So the process is in order to demolish a historic building, by our local ordinance, is to come through the Historic Architectural Review Board and get a certificate of appropriateness that will allow for that demolition. It's a public hearing process in which you take public input and make your decision based on the findings that you make during your hearing.
Any
So-
questions from the board for staff? Mr. Boyer?
Just as a reference to history, when was the last time that building was occupied or used?
Oh, that's a good question.
It was vacant, it's been vacant since it was moved, as far as I know, since it was moved
Yeah, I can't.
here. Is that, it's a
there was-
bookstore
yeah.
after it was this, that's right. I didn't know the timing. I have that in the report, but I didn't know when,
I-
actually,
I
We
think
have
it's
some
when I was a
public-
child, last time there was someone inside the
Five
building.
years ago?
Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe 6.
That wasn't that
it
long
was
ago.
purchased in '07, so before that, it was prior to that, that it was
Prior
ever,
to the city's purchase, also,
Right.
of course.
right.
Yes, I don't remember it being used since Doc Berry,
I don't-
whenever he invented the
screw
screw worm.
worm.
You know, he quit using it for that.
And
So that's a long
Child,
time
that-
ago.
That's the last I
yeah.
remember.
I don't have an actual memory of, it's been a long time.
I've been here a long time. So
And this was a hard decision on everybody, and nobody's happy about it. You know, it's just it's one of these. Do you pull the Band-Aid off one hair at a time, or do you just rip it off? And
Which-
Another question that I would ask, maybe this could be answered in your presentation, or maybe it's something that wasn't thought of, but once, say we do grant your permission to demolish the building, what then happens to the site? Is the site still registered as historic? I mean, if somebody was to build there, what happens to that?
Mayor, what it means is that that is a historic structure, so, but it is in the historic district, so if the historic structure is removed, then it's gone, but it's, we will take pictures and get all the information, anything we can get from that building to try to duplicate something. Doesn't have to be there, but it is in the historic district, so anything that goes there does have to be
Has to
consistent with the historic
conform.
district. Right, and it would go through this process before you, for any kind of approval.
So, I mean, somebody were to purchase that, they can't throw up a modern building.
Right.
That's what I wanted to make sure that we weren't opening the door for
and the commission hasn't deliberated yet on what to do. They're sort of doing one thing at a time. Is how they stopped kicking the can down the road on what to do with the building. What to do on the site after that is we're gonna kind of let this wound from this one heal for a little bit, and then we'll we'll start thinking about what's the next step. You know, but it certainly will be in the historic district. I will tell you, there's 2 interested parties. Both parties are interested in rebuilding something that's very reminiscent to that building. So I think this board will be pleased if either of those end up coming to fruition with the proposals that you'll see. So
So at this time, the request is whether you want to approve or deny the application or approve with some kind of conditions. You have a draft resolution in your packet to approve the demolition process. It does mean that it takes 15 days before that actual resolution would be effective. I mean, you can say it's effective immediately, but 15 days has to be waited until there's a possibility of anybody wants to challenge it or something, if they had any appeal process. So that's standard with any certificate of appropriateness that's issued for anything.
before I entertain any motions, I'd like to open up the floor for public comment. So Wendy,
Yes,
thank
we-
you for your
thank you.
presentation. Is there anybody here who would like to make a comment? Come on down, ma'am. We don't bite. State your name for us.
All righty.
Will you state your name for the record for us?
Yes, I will. My name is Barbara Matusik. I have a PhD in historic preservation from the University of Florida. And I can understand the feeling because I've lived here for a long time. And I like the building, just like everybody else does. It has historic significance not only to the city of Newberry, but also to the state of Florida. At one time, there was a screw worm that was devastating the cattle. And there was a gentleman here in town, and because I don't have my research in front of me, I don't recall his name, who lived in the Kincaid building. His family operated it as a drugstore, and behind them they had their home. And
Doc Berry.
All right, thank you. he produced a vaccine that helped the cattle industry. And probably without that vaccine, we probably might not have a valid cattle industry that we have today. So in order to say we've got something just historical to Newberry, it is historical also to the state. Normally what happens when you nominate a historic property, you go through a procedure which you take care of it first, then it goes to the state historic preservation officer, and then it is approved there as a historic building. So we only have it as part of a historic district as it stands right now. Understanding that the condition of the building is very bad, and it was bad in 2011 when I was in it, so I know it's got to be even worse now. There is one solution. If you go up to High Springs and you've been anywhere around the Great Outdoors Cafe, you know that they demolished all that building except for probably the front facade. If there was any way that we could get past the SHPO, which is the State Historic Preservation Officer, that we could be able to maintain just the front, the facade of the building, we might be able to work from there and maintain that historic preservation building with just that portion of it. I don't know, I would have to look into it, but I know that I can contact the people who would have the answer for you. Considering that you have possibilities of somebody wanting to build something similar to it, it would not be a historic building, it would be a replica of that particular building. And as much as I can say that the history behind it, we really need to save the facade if it's any way possible. Does anybody have any questions?
Have you ever worked through that process yourself?
Yes.
Do you have any idea of the timeline of how long it takes to work through the offices and get answers from the state and those
It
kind of things?
depends upon the historic preservation officer. And being summer, it might take a little bit longer than normal.
Ballpark for me.
Ballpark, maybe about a month and a half to 2 months.
Okay.
That's on the short side.
And when you did it before, do you have any idea of what that did to the demolition cost to just try to save the facade? And
That was not something that was saved. It was something that was demolished. There was a building in South Florida that was under the architect's name, and somebody wanted to build a mega mansion, and they tore down the building and built the mega mansion. So it would not be historic after you tear it down. You could put a plaque there, or you could, put a stand that had a photograph of the building and maybe some of the historic things that were related to it, but you could not call it a historic property any longer.
Okay.
If you use
Mr. Moyer.
material from the existing building in a rebuild, would that still be able to classify if you're using some of the original material?
Not the interior. No, if you're
For
taking...
the exterior.
Yeah, if you take, like what I was suggesting, the front, the facade of the building is pretty well intact. The back of it, I know it's falling down, but the front is board and batten, and I don't think there's much asbestos on the front part.
Was there any lead?
If it's bad, it's there. So,
I don't think this report talked about any lead, but
yeah.
they didn't test the paint.
In the one that I had from the earlier one that Barbara Hendricks gave me, I don't believe there was any lead finding. There were termites and there was the asbestos.
So what you're saying is you could take apart the facade and put the facade back up, and now it still counts, but you can't use wood from the interior of it in the new building and still have that count.
Well, there are certain standards that you have to follow, which is called the Secretary of the Interior, because of the National Park Service. And so there are standards that you have to go by. And I could get you a copy of those standards, but if you're doing a restoration, which would be what this is, there has to be a certain percentage of the building has to be the original.
And that was my question.
Yes, that would have to be the exterior of it. Would have
And I'm not sure that there's enough of the building left to do that restoration to still count. That was what the engineering
front,
structure
yes, yes, the front is the only one that I think that I
Yeah.
can see that is still
So I'm
pretty
not sure
stable.
that would still count as a restoration because there's not a percentage of it high enough left by the time you get all the asbestos out. That
I
would,
could look into it for you.
any other questions?
I would like to see you table it until some further research is done on it.
Well, anybody have any more questions for?
Well,
Okay.
I do, because you're talking about using material from inside, yet we know that there's not enough. And then you had mentioned just the facade.
Right.
I mean, if just the facade was able to be saved, dismantled, restored, and then a new building basically built behind that
behind it,
facade,
yes.
does that still give it us the ability to keep it registered as a historical?
It would still be part of the historic district because you have the building facade still sitting on the property.
Okay, so without having to use 80% of the rest of the building that we can't use, if we were just able to save the facade, that would be enough for us to keep it as a historic building.
I think but
We
not,
think so.
not
There's a-
separate from the historic district, as part of the historic district, yes. But
It has to have
not
a
as
percentage
separate.
of.
But not
and
a
the-
historic building.
See, that's,
Or the wood that we're talking about that saving is there's about 3 or 4 beams in the top, and
Yeah.
what we're thinking about is not using it in the.
okay,
We're thinking
so
about
it's
making
not
little
gonna-
plaques that people can buy and have a piece of the Kincaid, but that kind of a thing. It's not a.
yeah, so we can't keep it as a historic building, regardless of what we do, because there's not enough material. But we can keep it in the historic district.
And I can tell you that the commission
As
is
an
struggling to find the funding to demolish the building, much less to go in and try to. Even the saving the rafters is adding to the cost of the demolishing, which the commission feels is a good price to bear if we can find the money. But I'm not. My question about how much does that cost to now come in and try to cut off the facade and hold the facade there while you come in and. We don't. Both of the people, the applicants who are interested in the building, neither one of them are ready to move right now. So I'm not. I'm not sure the viability of that suggestion in the long term is going to be. So
If we approve the application, at what point would the city commission move forward with a demolition?
well, I think we could approve it tonight. Thank you, ma'am. We appreciate it.
okay.
I think we could approve it tonight and grant it, and then with the comment that hey, we would really like to see if that's a possibility, but give the city the power to say, well, that would be another $50,000 to try to save that, and we don't have that kind of money, but it wouldn't hold it up.
But, I mean, it makes no sense to not do anything, because then the building becomes a hazard and it'll collapse
It's
on
already
itself.
It's already a nuisance,
Yeah.
It would have to be 45 days, like what he said, even after we would pass this, before any
Right.
action could be taken, correct? Did I interpret that correctly?
It's 15 days before the
15 days,
certificate of appropriateness comes into effect, but the 45 days is if you were to negotiate with an applicant as the city of Newberry and say, we want to hold our decision off for 45 days while we negotiate these things up to that period of time.
I think the most appropriate thing would be for us to give the certificate along with our reservations and say, hey, anything that can be done to keep it as a on the historic registrar, trying to make sure I have that, but not to delay the process of what's painful for everybody
Keeping costs in mind.
and keeping cost in mind. That's what it always
We
comes
want to
down
try
to.
to preserve as much as we
Yeah.
can, to reuse as much as we can, but we don't want to.
If we had $500,000, we would have restored
Yeah.
the building a decade ago, And multiple agencies have tried to fundraise and get grants and those kind of things, and it just hasn't worked out. So this can just keeps getting kicked and kicked. If this was a privately owned building, we'd be sending an email every single month.
Mhm.
You got to clean it up. You got to do something.
We're probably a tropical storm away from this being a cleanup rather than a demolition.
Yeah. Do I hear any other public comment?
Hi, my name is Lisa Deming. We live behind the building. We bought the Berry house, so that's where we live, and have expressed our interest in trying to work with the city and salvage or work with the restoration of what that building looks like. I have presented a preliminary proposal to the city commission last week or a week or so ago, and I know they're interested in moving very quickly as well. Our interest had been to try to purchase that corner very nominally. I know what the city has put into it, and I know they're interested in recouping as much of that as possible. I'd love to say I have that, but I don't. And that we would take the city down or take the building down with the intent to salvage as much as what we've talked about. The facade is certainly a consideration for that. I think that can be done. Our interest was also to work with some local artists, which I think Jordan just mentioned, to try to get, the entire second floor is done, the walls and the ceiling are done in kind of a pine, stained pine, very similar to a couple ceilings in my own house, and so I know how pretty those are, to be taken down and work with some artists to either have some wood etchings or some frames, or something that can be done for people who want to have a little piece of that building, and then help that, turn that around and put it back, and to be able to give back to the city somehow. It's also our intent to rebuild it in that fashion, with looking very much the structure the way it is, but have it prepared so we can have other venues in there either. And we've thrown out some things, I'll kind of just throw them out to you without having you look at the proposal, to consider putting a commercial kitchen in there and working with the city to, because it comes with part of that pocket park in there too. That I know the city's been very interested in a farmer's market, and we are as well. Would love to see something like that be in that corner. Have a venue to work with the city. Probably the only change that we'd be interested in what the building looks like is on the east side, to put maybe some garage door sliding glass doors. I don't know if you're familiar with like the Four Rivers down on Archer Road, so you can pop that open and have kind of an indoor-outdoor venue to work with some of the activities in the city. I think I've covered all the points that we have. We'd love to see and be involved. Is there anything else? All right. That's all I have to say. If anybody has anything.
Miss Lisa is one of the applicants that of the two that I mentioned. Just so everyone's clear, though, the city doesn't have the power to just say, we love that proposal, we're going to sell it to you. If we decide to sell, then it has to go out for bid, it has to go through a process, it has to do, and then once it's sold, the city loses then the power to demolish the nuisance. So now you're at the private owner's timeline for when they generate the funds to move forward with the project. So what the commission had decided was, we love that proposal and we think that's a great idea, but it's easier for the city to work through this historic process and get the building down, and then we can work through, and we can build big packages that award points for certain things that this board and the commission would like to see, like we're going to rebuild it in the style of that building. But if you decide to go down the road of selling it as it is, we can't just sell it to a person. It has to be open for everybody. There's 6 months there. Now you go through the process. That's another 2 or 3 months, and then whoever wins the bid package, now you're at their timeline for. You can write that into the bid. Once you have it, you've got 6 months to demolish. But now you start this process all over again, and then if she wins the bid package, then she would be back here with her application to demolish the building, save the front, those kinds of things.
Well, only because you're here and you're looking at this as one of the bidders, what would be your timeline to demolish the building, and does that include the asbestos abatement, everything to do with the demolition? What kind of timeline were you looking at?
Without pulling out my exact proposal, I know for us, we needed to have everything down and done in less than a year. I know that's longer than what the city's looking at, but we don't want to insure it any longer than that. And so, to have that in, and I would anticipate, I think I wrote in the proposal 6 months for that we would get the building down.
And what is the city's timeline if this were approved to get it demolished?
I think the city is just working through the steps, the process. They're ready to go as soon as they get the application, as soon as we've already got some different bid packages for the cost of taking it down for the asbestos abatement and those kinds of things. There's also some potential, there's some commissioners that think we need more parking downtown, especially since we just lost the parking down there, so they're interested in having a parking lot. But again, we haven't got into, I kind of cut that conversation off because I didn't want to dilute the two conversations. One conversation is what to do with the building right now, and then the next conversation is what to do with the building, or what to do with the site after that. The first conversation is the building not, can you not fix it? You know, what do we need to do with it? And then we can, you know, lick our wounds and decide, all right, what do we want to do now? Do we want to put the empty lot up for bid and write a bid package that would say we'd love to see somebody come in and rebuild a replica, something reminiscent of it? Do we feel like we need downtown parking? You know, but all of those conversations can kind of happen after we've all had a chance to catch our breath.
Well, I'm looking at this, if the city is not going to hold on to that piece of property, I mean, if we're looking at putting it up for a bid, that building's been standing as long as it's been standing now. I mean, if we've got bidders that are looking at taking the property down upon 6 months after, or within 6 months after their bid is approved, you know.
Well, the city would have it down before that, and then we can put it back on.
I understand that, but I'm looking at this as a taxpayer. And, you know, you may only have a 6 or 8 month window before the new owner has that piece of, that structure down anyways, which, you know, in the overall scheme of things, it's not really a long time.
Well, as a taxpayer, if you sell the building in the state that it is, you're going to sell it for $1. But if you tear it down, you'll sell the lot for about $40,000 to $50,000.
But we won't recover the cost of tearing that building down.
No. If the city will spend about $15,000 to tear it down, and we could sell an empty lot, would be valued between $40,000 and $50,000. To sell it to somebody as is, we haven't got. We tried to give it away and we couldn't give it away. So if you're a taxpayer and you're trying to recoup the cost,
I would take
that's the
So
Yeah.
it's actually more fiscally sound
to tear it down
to
and
tear it
and
down,
sell the
to have
lot.
the city tear it down. Okay.
And whichever way it goes, I mean, it's certainly our interest to be involved in that piece anyway and still try to be involved in the salvage.
Now,
You're not going to recoup the cost that the 2007 commission spent on the building, but that's we can't.
that I understand that. I mean, we're going to take a loss. But we took that loss a long time ago. But we can recoup the money it's going to cost to tear it down. But there's no way of having this thing bidded out and having a new owner who's willing to work with the city to salvage the parts that we would like salvaged.
But the city
During
could,
in the same interim.
but the city could salvage that just as.
I think the city is the best entity to go in there and get the building tear down in a timely manner and with the concerns of the citizens to salvage what can be salvaged. I think once you work through the bid process to not, you can write all the legal rhetoric into the bid package, but once that's sold, it's the new owner's prerogative.
And the city will know pretty much what
Right.
we're looking at as far as salvaging from that building.
Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions for Lisa? All right. Any other questions from the audience? Thank you, Ms. Lisa.
Thank you.
Hang on one second, sir. He's up with it.
So I'm Jeff Tate. I have the pleasure of being Lisa's fiance. So I'm a kept man. I live in that Berry house with her. And we specifically came to Newberry to do something that both of us have always wanted to do, and that is buy an historic house in an historic district and renovate it. And so we actually live in Dr. Berry's house. We enjoy it tremendously. It's a wonderful house, and we have invested our time and treasure, hundreds of thousands of dollars, into new plumbing, new roofing, new everything in that house, because at 80 years old, everything was obsolescent. Okay? So we're looking forward still to a new kitchen, and new electricity, and some additional things. So there's still more money to go into that. Having said that, I agree with the mayor here that the best thing for the Kincaid building right now is for the city to maintain ownership and go ahead with the demolition as the owner, and then have some covenants on that property when that property is transferred. Having invested the time and treasure in the Berry House and living right there and having to walk out the back door and look at the back of that building every day, I am absolutely not in favor of a parking lot. And city commissioner's opinions notwithstanding, is my opinion, and I have walked the streets of Newberry, and there is lots of parking in the city of Newberry all along the main drag here on all the side streets. There's no need for an additional parking lot. You simply need to utilize and sign the parking that already exists. So I would hope that if you grant this feasibility, or whatever we call this thing you're granting, that it also goes forward with some caveats about what's done with that empty lot in the interim. And as Lisa said, we'd be very interested in acting as host or leasing that space to do a farmer's market on a regular basis or something like that. But I'm not in favor, and I don't think Lisa is either, in having another parking lot next to our house. Thank you.
And again, that was why I kind of nixed the conversation about what's happening, because I don't want to dilute the two. That was one commissioner's comment. You know, what happens with it? My belief is what will immediately happen with it is an expansion of the Berry Park. While we figure out what's going on, we'll just kind of grass it over and add some benches. That's the cheapest thing to do while you sit on it and figure it out. I'm all in favor of getting our historic district back on the tax rolls. So, you know, I like a lot of the applications that are out there. But again, I don't want to get us sidetracked. I think the question tonight is, what do we grant the certificate of appropriateness to demolish is the only really pertinent question in front of us right now. So if there's no other public comment, any other comment from the board, are you ready to make a motion?
I would only add, you know, certainly as a member of the beef cattle industry in the state of Florida, and just having gone through a screwworm outbreak last year in South Florida, the historic relevance of Newberry and the Kincaid building was reminded of that fact and not lost on a lot of people in the state. And so it's certainly unfortunate that the building's fallen in disrepair, but I guess I would put forth the motion to grant the application by the city.
I have a motion. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay. Any further comments?
I do like the idea of the covenant when we go to sell the land.
Sure, absolutely. All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimous. Okay, moving on to topics from member. I'm sorry.
What I
Did we
would
ca a
suggest
step
that we
here?
do at this point is
Read the
to go ahead
resolution.
and read the resolution.
Thank you.
Yeah, because there's an issue.
This is a resolution, HARB-CA 1301, a resolution of the Historic Architectural Review Board of the City of Newberry, Florida, for approval of a certificate of appropriateness authorized under Sections 11.11 of the City of Newberry Land Development Regulations, providing for the demolition of a deteriorated historic structure located at 25370 West Newberry Road, Newberry, Florida. The building is known as the Kincaid Building or Kincaid Store, located at 25370 West Newberry Road within the Newberry Historic District. The Kincaid Building, which has been designated historic by the provisions of the City of Newberry Land Development Regulations, repealing all resolutions in conflict and providing an effective date. The appropriate motion is to pass resolution number HARB-CA 13-01 as read by title only.
Mr. Harrison, would you like to make that motion one more time?
Yes, I'd move that we accept HARB-CA 13-01 as read.
And was it Miss Jessica? Did you second? No?
I second.
Mr. Boyer, was
I
that
second.
Is that your second? Okay. All those in favor signify by
You
saying
call for further discussion before.
any further discussion now that we've had the resolution read by title only.
This is your opportunity, public, to also, if
Yes.
there's any further discussion.
Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passed unanimously. All right, topics from members for discussion. Anybody? Mr. Boyer, you have any topics?
I don't.
Ms. Wanda?
No.
Mr. Herson?
No, I voiced them all.
Ms. Jessica?
I just want to comment on the fact that while we approve this, that it should be stated, as somebody who was here when this building was purchased as well, that Newberry sort of created its own hardship in this case by leasing this to someone who also let it sit vacant and did not properly care for something we consider a historic monument in this city, and that it's a shame that it had to come to this.
Agreed. I have no
Hear,
comments. Mr. Attorney? Any
No comments.
Mr. Thomas? Citizen comments? Hearing none. Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.